why are we here today? I'm someone who's lived a life full of experiences, and these experiences have been physical, mental, emotional, and personal. And specifically 10 years ago, 11 years ago to be completely honest, I was diagnosed with something called ankylosing spondylitis, and this changed my life significantly. It was an instant impact in my life. Ankylosing spondylitis, for those of you who don't know, which I'm sure may not have been something in everyone's life, is a spinal disease. Now this spinal disease, left untreated, the spine would fuse and invariably I wouldn't be able to move. Now most people who have got ankylosing spondylitis live every single day of their life in some form of pain. So for me, when I got diagnosed with this and then subsequently 7 damaged discs in my back, neck and spine, I knew I had to change my life completely. So I changed the way I ate, the way I thought, not a word. I changed the way I lived, I changed the person I was, to be completely honest. And it was such a big impact that I'd learned so much from professionals, from my own experiences, that I felt a need to give back and a need of understanding. Sorry, I thought someone was coming on. The funny thing is, it is quite amazing that the ankylosing spondylitis was the straw that broke the camel's back, pardon the pun, on my back. Because up until the age of 16, I think it was, I had had 45 operations, medical operations, and that's, just to clarify, it's not 425, that is 45 operations. I weighed 5 stone more than I do now. I had asthma. I was allergic to basically every food group known to man. My father had 2 nervous breakdowns, my brother was in rehab, my sister was suffering from bulimia and anorexia, and I also had 2 near-death experiences. I say, talking about packing it in when you're young. I learned a lot at a massively young age, and having spondylitis on top of that just made me go deeper into trying to find out, I guess, who I was, but more who we are. Now, we all know that health is completely individual. We know that. It's an absolute fact. And for me, I had to find my own path. So now I feel more in control of my body, more in control of my mind and my emotions, which is something that we don't always feel connected to the whole, the complete. And I feel, not only I feel, we've seen it. David and I notice on a continual basis that we look at health in individual portions and not as a collective. But we'll explain why the collective is so important. Now, this book was created really to give you guys and to give the world a guidance through the minefield of information that's available. And we know there's so much information about health and well-being out there. We absolutely do. It's on the internet. Look at this store. There's hundreds of books. There are thousands of pages written already. But the difference is, the work that I've done, I was fortunate enough to work with some of the best numerologists, psychologists, nutritionists, surgeons, you name it. I've basically been there and done it on every single level. And whether it's spiritual, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional or mental, I've looked at every single element, and we've pulled this together to create the holistic guide to your health and well-being today. Now, I was so fortunate enough to work with 4 amazing editors, one of which we have here today. But there was Anne Perry. Anne Perry is an international and well-renowned numerologist. She's from Canada. Rolfe, who is a CEO of Steps Together Wellness and Rehabilitation Company. We have Sarah Leslie, who is a clairvoyant healer and medium. And I also call her my spiritual mother. She's given me a lot of her time and probably put me on the path to spiritualism, more importantly. And then we have Mr. David Moxon. Now, David's a 30-year psychologist. He has spent a huge amount of time guiding university students as a lecturer. He's also an entrepreneur, an author, and a very good friend of mine. Now, the Holistic Guide to Your Health and Wellbeing today hit number 41 in the best-selling book charts of Amazon in health and wellbeing. And my company also was recently awarded, I've got to get this right, but the award for innovation within health and wellbeing in corporates and individuals for the SME 500. It's an amazing achievement to even be considered for this award, and it's an amazing achievement to even be in the top 50 to write a book. After millions of books are published on Amazon, to be anywhere near the top 100 is an achievement. The top 50 is fantastic. Anything above that is wonderful. But I believe this for us is just the starting point. Now I'm going to pass over to David now to talk about one particular point, which is wholeness and connectivity, and also his view of the book as well.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you very much, and it's very nice to be here with you tonight, this evening. I met Oliver thinking about 4 years ago, and we met through a mutual friend. And it's one of those things that, where I'm sure you've all experienced this, we just clicked immediately. And I felt that, you know, I kind of, it was very strange because the friend that introduced us has known both of us individually for sort of 25, 30 years. And the strangest thing was, after talking to Oliver for about 2 minutes, I felt as though I'd known him for 25, 30 years. So something very odd was going on in terms of the forces at work in the universe, because, as I said, I felt as though I'd known him all this time. And for some reason, we immediately hit it off. He started talking to me about, he had this plan to write a book on some of the things he's just shared with you tonight. And I said, that's great. And I sort of said, you know, if you'd like me to be involved in any way, I'd be more than happy to be. And that's how I got involved in being the overall editor of the book. Obviously, I'm not an expert in some of the specialist areas, and that's why he brought in editors who sort of knew their stuff and were experts in their own field. But one thing, my background is actually in neuroscience and psychology, so I'm sort of more on the medical side, the biological side, and I suppose in some ways you could say my training has been in empirical science. So I come from in a way a slightly different perspective. However, I have a great interest in the sort of the broader aspects of health and well-being, and I believe that one of the problems, and I was sort of pointing this out to Oliver, and he sort of said, I like this because this is the underpinning, and I sort of said, this is the way you perhaps ought to think about taking the book. I think the big problem in our society today is that we've become very introspective and very reductionist. Everything in science is about looking at the minutiae. It's about drilling down. If you go to your GP because your throat hurts, obviously your GP will want to look at your throat. Your GP will want to try to find the solution to your problem in your throat, which is good clinical practice. They're not going to ask you about, are you under a lot of stress at the moment, and what's going on in the wider perspective of your life. And in some ways, as I said, coming from a scientific background, I can totally understand why. Because what is a GP going to do if you say, well, actually, doctor, I'm under a lot of stress at the moment, and I think that's probably suppressed my immune system, which has probably allowed this opportunistic pathogen to get into my throat and cause this inflammation. Great, the doctor's going to look at you a bit puzzled and sort of say, right, okay, well, you're absolutely right, that's what I think is probably going on. Can't help with your stress, but what I can do is give you some antibiotics for your throat. But that tells a story. The story is that where we are in science, where we are in popular culture, is this very much this reductionist philosophy of looking at things in the smaller and smaller way. In fact, if any of you are into, certainly I'm not an expert in this field, but if any of you, some of you know far more about this than I do, but if you're into things like subatomic physics, you will understand that that was probably one of human beings' biggest downfalls, to start looking at the atom and what's going on inside the atom. Because in actual fact, rather than making things clearer, by looking at what's going on at the subatomic world, we've actually become more confused. In fact, it's created a lot more confusion because the laws of macrophysics don't seem to make sense in the subatomic world. Now, I know I'm rambling on in a rather strange way, but the underpinning philosophy to this is that there is an alternative. It actually ties in with a philosophy which I was familiar with and I introduced Oliver to, which is called Gestalt. And it's a philosophy that goes back to the 1920s. It's actually a German philosophy. Basically, you may have come across it in everyday terms, in its very famous catchphrase, which is, the whole is greater than the sum of its. It was a philosophy that was espoused by people like Wertheimer, as I said, in 1923, and again another whole school of Gestaltists that believed that this is how we need to understand the world and the universe. That it only makes sense when you take about 4 steps backwards and you actually look at something in its complete form rather than trying to make sense of it by breaking it down into individual bits. An analogy that I spent most of my career using with students to try to make sense of that is if you think of the old-fashioned television screens where they had pixels. And the idea is that if you were to, you could do all the analysis you wanted on those pixels. You could actually measure their intensity, their colour, the vividness of them. So you could create a volume of information on each individual pixel. You could present that to somebody and you could say, there you are, now we've totally analysed that screen at any moment in time. But of course, what you would have failed to realise is that actually, if you'd have just taken a couple of steps back, you would have seen the whole screen in its completeness and suddenly realised that that was a freeze frame of the 6 o'clock news. And you would suddenly make sense of, that's the newscaster. Whereas by looking at each individual pixel, you would have had no ability to recognise that that was the 6 o'clock news presenter. It's only by looking at something in its totalness that it makes sense. And I was saying this to Oliver, that very often what books do is they drill down into certain aspects of health, they look at very specific areas, because this is the way in which our society seems to have gone in modern times. We're very much into this, let's drill down, let's try to make sense of things in a minutiae way. And what I said is, it's really good for people to understand that if we look at things in its completeness, we can therefore make more sense of the connectedness between everything. And this is what I found fascinating about the way then Oliver started to work with the book, because he suddenly brought in aspects of things that were very personal to him. You know, there aren't many books on health and well-being that bring in numerology, for example, quite a sort of esoteric area, as I'm sure you'll agree. But Oliver was wanting to bring that in because it was something that made him understand his life, his experiences. And as he has said to me on numerous occasions, it actually helped him understand things in a much greater way. And so, in some ways, the underlying philosophy of the book is to bring together disparate areas and to try to understand that there is commonality, there is a link between them. I've done a lot too much talking.
No, David, that was it is understanding. But going back to what you said, it's the understanding of self. Health is individual. You have to understand your own connectedness. We know the 4 cores: energy, physical, mental, emotional. Those are the 4 cores. Each of us have our own version of that. The Holistic Guide covers so many different elements, and it is really quite difficult to talk about everything. It's a 400 plus page book, and it would take way too much time to go through all of it now. But the Holistic Guide covers everything from the immune system, including healthy living and lifestyle, which we break down into 30 different areas, I think maybe more. Nutritional guidance, which looks at gut health, which is so vitally important in such a buzz moment for gut health, because it's a separate brain, it's another brain, which David and I will probably write another book on, about the outside world that we don't see compared to the inside world and the connectivity.
Can I just?
Of course you can.
There's just something that I learned many years ago, and a number of my friends were medical students. When I did my neuroscience originally, everybody thinks there's 2 main types of nervous system. You've got the peripheral nervous system, the central nervous system. There's actually a 3rd nervous system, which some of you may know anyway. It's called the enteric nervous system. When you're developing as initially an embryo, but later as a fetus inside your mother, neural tissue migrates or translocates to the gut. In fact, we produce more serotonin in our gut than we do in our central nervous system. And many commentators actually see the stomach as the 2nd brain. In fact, in many ways, there's a lot more research coming out now to show that the gut is probably one of the most important structures in the human body for overall health. So if you get your gut correct, your mental health and your mental well-being will also be correct. And it's probably where we get expressions like, when you're upset, I was gutted. And it's also when people say to you, go with your gut feeling on this, because it is intuitive. It's an intuitive brain as opposed to a cognitive brain.
It was actually interesting because the connective comes through what we call it the central part, where you feel your whole, your soul. So your everything is so connected, and this is again something that is so important here. It is the mind, it's the gut, it's the stomach, it is everything. And it's actually listening to your subconscious as well. That's so key. But we also talk about mental health, the connection between mental and physical, which is something which we know is there. It's categoric. But actually, there's so much that hasn't been said that we look at. We also talk about the chakra system, which, why do we talk about the chakra system? And I think people look at, where's the connectivity? The chakra system is very simple. It's an energy transducer. Chakras, well, there's 7 chakras which are connected to the physical body, and there's many more which are connected to the spiritual bodies. But the 7 chakra system is, as we've seen through COVID, we missed the connection. We all said, I miss that feeling between someone. That is the energy transducers through the chakra system. And those subtle energies turn into many different elements for the body to break down and to use as well. I also talk about numerology. Numerology is, as David said, one of the best, probably self-help tools I've ever used. Numerology specifically highlights reincarnation and the life paths we're here to live, to learn, but also the understanding of what we're here to bring, or what we brought with us, shall we say, our traits, our personalities, our heart's desire. And when you understand, in many respects, for me in particular, what your path is, why you're here, the guidance just becomes, for me, again, that much easier to follow. And therefore, having a greater understanding of self, of a spiritual element, and on this current path, I felt was absolutely vital, and something which I hope more people look at, because it's not understood enough. It's not looked at all, really, by anything other than esoteric, which is why it's a perfect place to be here. Vitally important, not just in the corporate world, but also in social connectivity. And additionally to that, deep breathing and meditation. And it's different, yes, deep breathing, it's all about breathing. However, deep breathing is a moment of calm, and meditation can take you deeper, one within yourself, but 2 within the spirit world. And we look at so many different elements to connect it together. This book goes through absolutely everything, and whilst I wish we had time to run through every single element, it's impossible to do so. And someone once asked me, it was quite some time ago, why am I doing this? And the bottom line is to help people. That's my why, that's my motivation, to help people. My belief and my feeling is that we're here to evolve and connect together. And the more that we help each other, the more we can evolve as a human race, the more that we can generate and build and connect. Because without this, we're all going to die and fade away. We know that we're only here for a moment in our evolution. We've seen that, it's been told 1 billion times. But at this point, unless we help each other, and unless there's connectivity, as a human race, we will fail and we will fold. It always makes me a bit emotional, to be fair. I genuinely believe that we can all help each other, whether it's the smallest thing, and we've all said it, I'm not going to repeat, the ability to help. We know that by helping on the smallest level, whether it's picking up the phone, checking if someone's okay, being there, just listening, those elements can make such a huge impact into the world. Now, just this other day, I was in a meeting in St. Paul's, last week in fact, and it was at a restaurant. It was a beautiful day like today, and it was a perfect scene like today. And about an hour and a half after the meeting had finished, and it was a fantastic meeting, I left the meeting, and opposite was a shopping centre. And surrounding this shopping centre was police cordoned, and there was a fire ambulance and police cars and police everywhere. And this area is synonymous with, unfortunately, people committing suicide. And in the city, it's happened far too often. And anyway, I went up to one of the police people, a policewoman, in fact, and asked her what had happened, just to, maybe for my own volition, for connectivity, I don't know. And she looked at me, and I said, look, I understand this is an area of reputation. And she looked at me with a very knowing eye and said, look, I can't tell you specifically, but it will be reported in the press. And invariably, someone had, in a busy restaurant and a busy shopping centre, got up, jumped over a railing and killed themselves in the middle of hundreds of people. And this is the reason why, or one of the reasons why I wrote this book. We are entering into a scenario where there's so many more stresses and strains post-COVID than we've ever had before. And I do believe there's a mental health tsunami coming. I believe it's basically here. And this event really hit me and it hurt me, and probably made me want to do this even more, to be completely honest. But the fact that people are going through so much is hard, and we just don't have enough help. In fact, so there's a fascinating fact. So in 2017, there was a global burden of disease study. And bear in mind, it was 2017, before the pandemic. Now, it predicted at that point that 792 million people were suffering from some form of mental health disorder. The two biggest disorders were anxiety and depression, which covered about 550 million people. Additionally, in that survey, they noted that 178 million people, they estimated 178 million people, were suffering from a substance abuse disorder, drugs or drink. Now, that's in total 970 million people before the pandemic. That's 12.5% of the population suffering from a mental health disorder or substance abuse disorder. Now, post the pandemic, post the stresses of energy prices, a war in the Ukraine, life, that number is now close to 1.3 billion people living with some form of mental health disorder or substance abuse disorder. That is in fact, it's over 16.5% of the total population on this planet. It is huge. Think about that number. It is not only huge, it is dramatic and it is devastating. And it's flipping hurtful. But we're here to try and help as many people as we can. And through the experiences that I've had, through everything that I've learned and studied and taken so much time to bring in, it's not just for me. It was never just for me. I learned my stuff over the past 2 decades. This book is for everyone else. And the point here is that it's not a directive. It's an opportunity. It's not me telling you to do something. It's not me here to preach anything. It's something for you to look at and pick out what works for you. And you might look at it and go, actually, there's a nice bit on sleep. I like that. I'll use that. Great. I'll take it. Anything that does something positive for you, I will take with both hands. And I hope that we can progress that. Now, I am going to pass on. Pass over. I'm not going to pass on. I'm going to pass on David. No, I am going to pass on to David because we did want to leave you guys with something. I know we don't have much time left, but we did want to leave you with something that we hope you can actually take away with you and use today. And therefore, I'm going to pass over and talk about something which is probably one of the most important things in life for your health: sleep. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you again. But I mean, I said, well, I'll do a little, very short little thing, just some hints and tips. Sleep is a fascinating topic, and I mean, I literally could do a whole series of talks on this, but it's one of my specialist fields, and it's something I've researched over a number of years. And I started off by sort of saying, shall I say something about the guy who first did it, American guy called William Demont in the 60s, who brought participants into sleep labs and wired them up, and was fascinating what was going to happen, you know, because up until then, of course, everybody thought that sleep was this passive thing that everybody does. You close your eyes at night, you do a bit of dreaming, probably, which we all know and we've always known, you know, and we've had different interpretations. Of course, people like Sigmund Freud had his views on it, and lots of other people. And then you wake up in the morning and everyone thinks, well, I didn't do much there really, apart from just be zonked out for 7-8 hours. In actual fact, when William Demont did this in the 60s, he suddenly thought, goodness me, this is a very complex behaviour. There are some incredible things that go on every time we sleep. And really, we're only scratching the surface. We really don't know what happens when we go to sleep, to be honest. As I said, I've spent 2 decades studying this in a lot of detail. And we really, it's one of those things where, again, I have to sort of keep forgetting my science almost and thinking, is there something else going on here? Because I've become more and more intrigued as time's gone on. And I actually wonder sometimes whether we should be widening our hypothesis of what sleep is And we should be including things like, are we going to different dimensions? Are we opening portals? Is this, Jung had his idea of the collective unconscious. Are we locking into something that's far greater than we really understand? Because not everybody dreams about, what Freud said about what's going on in your subconscious. Cognitive scientists say that it's a way of consolidating memories. I've written a book on it. Yes, great. It is a way of consolidating memories, possibly, but not everybody dreams about what's been going on that day and what's been going on in their life. There are many people who dream about places, and they see people and places that they've never, ever come across or had any vague interaction with in their conscious life. So it does beg the question, where are they pulling these memories, these cognitions from? They're not, there's something going on. Are they really visiting places that are beyond them? So that's another story. So I thought, well, shall I do that? Well, anyway, I've done it. So I thought, no, that's going to take way too long. So I thought, well, I'll leave people with one or two final little thoughts and tips. Obviously, I'm perhaps preaching to many of you are converted on this. Probably, I would always say, don't drink alcohol. People say 2 to 3 hours before going to sleep, because it affects basically you've got 4 stages of sleep. You go down to deep sleep, stage 4, and then you start going back up. This is what Demant found. And then we enter a very strange stage, which he originally called paradoxical sleep, but actually is now more commonly referred to, which I'm sure you've all heard of, called rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep. We have on average about 4 or 5 of those a night. And what, if you have alcohol and you do other poor sleep hygiene things, what it does is it actually disrupts the duration and the stages of sleep, and it actually affects those stages. Therefore, it has a major impact on your overall health, because if you consistently disrupt those stages, then it starts to affect things like your immune system, starts to affect things like your nervous system long term. So things you can do: avoid alcohol, avoid excessive exercise prior to going to bed. Also avoid screen work. I mean, I even go as far as to say, don't have your mobile phone on the side of your bed. Don't have anything which generates electromagnetic radiation in the bedroom. So sorry if you've got TVs on the wall in the bedroom, but I would say get rid of it all. Because the whole point of sleep hygiene, and this is where the word comes from, is about having a clean environment when you go to sleep. Also have a blackout blind, because you have a little gland in your brain called the pineal gland, which secretes a hormone called melatonin. That tends to peak about midnight, or would have done for our ancient ancestors, when it is pitch dark. If any of you go or have ever been anywhere where you're in total isolation from any urban sort of area, you will find that if you wake up in the middle of your night, which I did once on a holiday and scared the hell out of my wife because I suddenly woke up and said I've gone blind, and I shook her and she thought, and I started trying to fall out of bed because it was so oppressive, the darkness, it was almost pressing on my eyes. I opened my eyes and thought I had gone blind, but actually that is very good for you. Most of us have ambient lighting creeping into our bedrooms in one way or another, and it is that suppresses the production of melatonin. Melatonin is your friend. Lots of studies have linked it to cancer in terms of the opposite. If you don't produce enough melatonin, you're at higher risk for things like cancer. So to have more melatonin produced at night is a brilliant thing. It's a definite. So the darker you make your room, the more of this substance you can produce. It's also another reason why people who do shift work often has impacts on health as well. If you work nights, because it means whenever you go to bed, it's very difficult, of course, because it's often sunny outside, to make your room dark enough. So it's not just often the disturbances; it's actually to do with light. So a few little tips, a few little thoughts there about ways in which perhaps you can, think about improving your night's sleep, and particularly the light element, because of its connection with things like circadian rhythms and circadian cycles. And again, Oliver does cover that in the book.
I love listening to David. You can tell how excited he gets about every small element about it. And I always get drawn into these conversations. I sit there going, oh really? That's really. But he's right. Sleep is so... I don't know if anyone's got small children or had small children. I've still got a 9-year-old who doesn't sleep properly. And I tell you, it doesn't help. It really doesn't help. So actually getting a proper night's sleep And I do follow David's route, and in fact, we've done so much research on this, and it is in the book, and there's so many of these topics that we're touching on. Absolutely every single part is in the book. But guys, this is everything that I've learned, everything that I've put together, everything that I've spent at least the last 20 years of my life going through, probably more to be fair. I think my whole life, in fact, for the last 40 odd years, there's always been something to deal with and something to focus on. And generally, I've tried to improve my holistic health, and I hope that you can take this book and these experiences that I've had for the betterment of your own holistic health. I thank you so much for coming, for listening to both of us waffle on occasionally. And if you have any questions and queries, I think we've got some time to answer anything that comes along. And I believe we might be signing a couple of books if anyone wants to purchase a book a little bit later. So thank you so much. Thank you, guys. I'll sit down.
If anyone's
Actually, I'm
question.
You don't have to have any questions. It's absolutely fine. You can ask anything. I really don't mind. Yes.
You know, you were very good in telling us how your journey started with these difficulties, health difficulties, that they were as well reflecting in sort of family difficulties. You know, everything was like correlating to each other. You know, it's like you were experiencing this in your physical body, but as well there was this sort of difficult circumstances as well around you. It's like everything was connected energetically somehow. Do you experience any of the opposite effect? Once that you were starting to get better yourself within your body, you started to heal the ailment, and you started to heal and feel better on yourself in your own body, and feeling at ease. You see that reflected as well on your outer reality somehow.
Do you know what? That's a genuinely wonderful question. I can have a really long answer to this, but actually, if you ask my family individually, we all feel very spiritually connected. And we know that there's, let's say, a protection around our family. And I feel that each of us have gone through the journeys that we've gone through for a very specific reason. So I mentioned Rolfe, who's an editor. He's my brother. So he is the one who went through drugs, drinking, gambling, rehabilitation. Now he owns UK rehabilitation centres. So he's gone through his own journey. My sister came out of her journey, ended up running a department for herself. My dad's still what he is, but bless him, he tries in everything, and more so for us. And actually, when I talk about my father, it's a very different relationship. Parents divorced, a lot of things going on in their lives, but actually, we know that he's in our life to show us elements that we should follow, shouldn't follow. And he chose that this path to allow us to see what not to do, which is quite difficult to understand if you're not of that world. Yeah. But genuinely, as I took my progression under control, my life changed dramatically. There was a real shift. And I've had my company for over 13 years, and all of my issues over the last 12, 13 years were co-current. It was all completely in sync. And the progression that we've had as a business has been absolutely massive. And the more I've actually connected to myself, the easier things have become. And the more that actually I seem to be connected to others. And it's a very difficult path to follow because you don't really know where it goes. And I've spent years, literally years, either writing books or speaking or just putting out information to help people. And you don't know if it comes back, but actually I've started to see there's a lot of positive effect, and I feel there's a real need for it now. So, as I said, it's an absolutely brilliant question because I've never been asked that before, so it's absolutely fantastic. But yes, absolutely. As I, let's say, manifested my own journey, everything else around me came together, and I'm very fortunate to have a wonderful wife, 2 great children, a great dog, a great company. I always got to mention the dogs, it's like a third child. And I generally feel really blessed. But not only that, I feel blessed, and a lot of people won't understand this and can't understand this, but I feel blessed going through everything I've ever been through. And I would never change any of it, ever. I wouldn't change any of those experiences, no matter how hard it was to get through them. And even if I felt that I was never going to get through them, I wouldn't change it, because it would change who I am now. And I am genuinely pleased with who I am now. It's not an arrogancy. I'm just very comfortable in my own skin. I believe who I am, I believe what I'm trying to do, and I going back to what we were talking about before, the connectivity here, this is what I listen to. You know, I've been involved with mediums, healers, clairvoyants my whole life. My father constantly goes to get experiences, but for me, I know that if I listen to myself and I'm connected to me, that's all I need. And yes, so thank you very, very much for that question. Thank you. Is there any other questions? And you can say.
I had one. But,
Yes.
You were talking about the kind of skyrocketing levels of mental health issues globally, and how the book helps people to kind of come up with ways in which they can deal with those. It's a bit of a tricky question. So the world we live in is not right. I think we could all agree with that. So the human reaction to it is the manifestation of all these disorders. So to what extent, in your view, is this a completely normal and therefore not a disorder or adverse reaction, but a completely human and expected reaction to a completely abnormal society and way of structuring things? And what would you say? I mean, there's lots of things one can do, obviously, you know, in terms of anxiety and things like that. Tips I read them in the book and they're really useful. But what do you say, sort of in response to that? You know, that actually, in some sense, although it is really important to deal with the self, there's obvious kind of structural problems that we have that are to which the human response is anxiety, is depression, and in fact it would be very odd. In fact, when you said the number, I know it sounds terrible, but I was thinking that's not as many as I thought. I would have gone. I would say, and it probably is undiagnosed, probably much more towards 85% of people are suffering because of the way we're living our life. So I just wanted to kind of ask you what your views were on that.
It's a big question. It's a very big question. Actually, if I put my corporate hat on for a moment, I'm working in the financial world, and I basically guide investment banks both in recruitment, staffing, but also health and well-being. And I use finance in a particular way because the whole of the financial world is structurally changing. We are in a complete ending of one cycle, which has lasted for about 45 years, give or take, and we're into a new one. With every new cycle, there's anxiety. There is concern. It's kind of like, why is there a war now? You almost think it's done purposely. I wouldn't want to say anything. COVID, was it done purposely or not? There's a reason why we're in this huge shift. So you're absolutely right. In fairness, we should feel anxiety. We should feel worry. There's so much going around us that is problematic. But even still, we know that there's this outside environment. The environment in itself, no matter where you are, affects your being. So if you lived in Barbados, for example, and you are seeing beautiful seas and sandy beaches all day, and in fact I remember going there and I spoke to this person and said, do you not want to leave and have a career? And he goes, why? I was like, and we had a conversation about half an hour, and no, you're absolutely right. And he has no stress, completely free from stress. There's no money stress, there's no financial stress, there's no coldness, there's no wars, there's no overbearing oppression. And we live in a Western world which does have that. And invariably, it's about how we cope with it. And yeah, you're right in saying, you would feel strange if people weren't affected and didn't have anxieties and worries and concerns and all the other things involved. But invariably, it's not just that, it's the health as well. We know that an unhealthy mind will affect the physical. For me personally, the physical manifestations of an illness come from something else. All right, yes, there's DNA, and if you've got family DNA of heart issues, the chances are, yes, you'll get it. And it's the lucky DNA club in that respect. But taking that aside, mental damage will lead to physical damage. And it's the same, energetic damage. Being energetically imbalance will cause a physical damage. Same as emotional. It's all connected as the whole. But the problem we've got is that we only see the physical at the end of it. And actually, that's the end. It's not the bit beforehand. And this is what the whole book's about. It's trying to connect everything you can do to live a happy life. Really, I think that's the element. So for me, I go for a walk every day, 45 minutes. I love taking the dog just to get out. And he's a great excuse. And he really is. He's my excuse to get out. But actually, it makes me feel happy. I feel a million times better. I've got exercise, lungs in my air, air in my lungs. And actually you go, okay, well I was maybe 1+ than I was beforehand. And it's just basically having as many plus points as you can just to be on a slightly better keel. Then you know the struggle's going to be there. You know they're not going away. And I think it's a very sensible question, because that's actually what the book's about. It's knowing that you've got this environment around us which is damaging. And I talk about East versus West as well, because in the Eastern culture, meditation's high, deep breathing's high, food's, you have less sugar in your food, etc., 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 which we take in completely. And actually it's the balance of knowing that, because if you don't know that, and you're only ever seeing, America's a pretty poor example of this. Their foods are poor. You know, they're poor quality. They're basically going down either focusing on a soya route or sugar. Those are their two main food groups. Sugar is basically one of the biggest diseases on the planet. Literally, it's one of the biggest diseases, one of the biggest addictions that no one knows. I would agree with you. I think there's more people than 16.5%. It's probably adults only, so it goes up, maybe to 30-odd%. However, I think there's far more undiagnosed health issues for virtually everyone. If everyone got tested for everything, we probably wouldn't leave the house. But especially mental health. We all know when there's something not right. And I think that's the element of the start of a mental health issue. And the more that you can help yourself, I think the better you can be. But it's also being brave enough to go, do you know what? I've got an issue. I just need a bit of help. I need someone to talk to. I need someone to listen to me. I need some advice, some guidance. And that takes a lot of bravery to go, I don't feel right. So with all the environments around, the book is about self-control and awareness, bottom line. And invariably, that's what we need today, probably more than we've ever needed it before.
Thank you.
Thank you.